We begin with the top story tonight. These absolutely serious and explosive allegations that Russia was offering bounties to the Taliban to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. This potential new scandal is also about what President Trump knew and when. The Washington Post reporting, officials believe the Russian bounties resulted, yes, in success on the Russian side, the death of U.S. troops. U.S. intelligence officers were warning superiors about suspected bounties as far back as January. And the New York Times reports that detail, which puts heat on when Trump knew or how policy could break down on something so grave if he never knew at all. And that is Donald Trump's defense today. But the Times states that the intelligence finding was in fact briefed to President Trump, and the White House's National Security Council discussed the problem in March. Meanwhile, a National Security Council spokesman is saying the veracity of these underlying allegations continues to be evaluated. Those are the outlines of the story in essence, and we have experts to break it down. But let's just take in the essence of exactly what's going on here. The United States is not technically in a hot war with Russia, but Russia infamously clashes with U.S. interests. Everybody knows about that. Russia intervened in the last presidential election to a criminal degree, according to our own Justice Department. An ongoing plot to pay for killings of U.S. troops would be, of course, a huge escalation, according to some, a potential act of war. So the White House's response is shaping up to be a scandal in its own right. Now, as for Russia, the exposure of this plot, as mentioned, we're referring to the articles and independent reporting I just referenced, as well as intelligence analysis. So all of that exposure wouldn't lead any reasonable observer to expect Russia to come out and confess. We will show you, as part of reporting, what we're hearing from them, a Kremlin aide doubling down on their denial today in this NBC exclusive interview.
I don't think that this situation is possible ever. So this is really ridiculous. This is really ridiculous to spread this kind of information.
You don't think that, well, if it did happen, do you believe it would?
No, maybe I can sound a little bit rude, but this is a 100% bull. It's non-diplomatic thing, but it's a bull.
That's strong, yeah. Mr. Peskov.
As simple as that.
Strong rhetoric, simple rhetoric, but according to many, and this is my job to tell you as a journalist, according to many of our journalistic colleagues, our own reporting, the intelligence, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that strong rhetoric is also false. Now, Donald Trump facing bipartisan rebukes in Congress over all this tonight. We're also learning that 8 Republican House lawmakers got a briefing about this at the White House. From the White House, Democrats are supposed to get their briefing tomorrow. So, as we are joined by experts who will walk us through this, a few big questions. How far did this plot go? Can President Trump handle any escalating proxy conflict with Russia? Did this intelligence reach him or not? Is he lying about it? And if so, why? Let's get right to it. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, is here, as is Malcolm Nance, an intelligence analyst and author of The Plot to Betray America, How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. 2 experts who have been in the room when these kind of plots and intelligence assessments are made and policy is then made. Serious stuff. Good evening to both of you. Ambassador, dealer's pick on any of the above questions to start our analysis tonight.
Well, we need to know more. I want to say that. There's been fantastic reporting corroborated by many different outlets, but Mr. Peskov, somebody I know well, when he says BS, then we need to interrogate it. We need to know more. That's the first thing I want to say. But second, if it is true, it is, just like you said, Ari, an amazingly scary escalation in Putin's belligerent behavior around the world against American interests. But it follows a pattern. I also want to underscore, this is not the first time that he has done things that other people would consider criminal against American interests, starting with annexation of Crimea in 2014, as you said, in 2016, intervening in our election, criminal intervention, 2018, trying to assassinate Mr. Skripal in the United Kingdom, and now potentially this. And I would just add to this, as there's already been reporting of Russians providing weapons to the Taliban. So this is just a further part of that story. a very scary escalation. And the reason he continues to escalate is because President Trump never, not once in 4 years, has ever pushed back on Vladimir Putin. His administration has, I want to make that clear, but never has the President of the United States says, you cannot do that. There are implications for you doing that. And already we're, 3 days into this story, and President Trump hasn't even once said, if these allegations are true, it's completely outrageous. You cannot kill American soldiers on the battlefield. He could say that literally right now. He could get on TV and say that right now. And he has made the decision not to do so. And that also follows a pattern, a 4-year pattern of never, ever pushing back on Vladimir Putin.
And Ambassador, before I bring in Malcolm on the intelligence, what is the import of Russia and specifically Putin's use of proxies, cutouts, third parties, intermediaries to advance their interests?
Well, of course, he does it all the time. So he can deny it, right? The GRU, in this case, there's already stories in the Russian press. Well, maybe they were a rogue operation. Now that Mr. Peskov has made clear that they're just going to deny it, that happens all the time. But again, intelligence is hard. Malcolm's going to tell you about that. I used to be a consumer of intelligence when I worked at the National Security Council before becoming the U.S. ambassador. I had that job for 3 years. I want to make one other point. Your job, I was a senior director for Russian affairs, is to make sure that the president is aware of this intelligence, sure, especially when they are making policy decisions. And let's be clear here, after this intelligence was known, President Trump invited Putin to join the G7. After this intelligence was known, he called on the troops in Germany to be reduced. After this intelligence was known, March meeting, according to the New York Times, nobody's denied that, he's had several phone calls with Vladimir Putin. So the way it normally works when I worked at the National Security Council is that would be in his briefing, that before we would make a call with Vladimir Putin, it would be written right there in his briefing materials, Mr. President, you should know that we have intelligence, even if it wasn't completely confirmed that this might be going on, that might change the tenor of that conversation. And that's where intelligence and policy comes together. And it sounds like nobody bothered to bring this intelligence to the attention of the President of the United States. That is a breakdown in the National Security Council's work as well.
That's an important point that, as raised in our lead, we want to get into with both of you because there's either that complete breakdown or, as Trump has done in other issues, I'm not saying we have it confirmed on this one, there's the possibility that he's throwing people under the bus. So they did their job, they did their work, they brought the information to him, and he's saying, oh, I didn't know about it. I didn't know about it, Malcolm, is the I don't know defense, to put it simply, which is different than Trump's other Russia defenses that we've heard on big issues the ambassador raised, which is I don't care, or I don't believe Americans. I don't believe the intelligence people I hired. I believe Putin. I take his word for it. An echo that is very relevant now as we deal with the serious story of the targeting of United States troops. With that in mind, Malcolm, take a listen to that version of the Trump defense. This was in Helsinki.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Malcolm.
You know, Donald Trump is the master of the Sergeant Schultz defense, right? I know nothing. I know nothing. But that's just one of the many things that he uses in his repertoire. Every one of the other excuses that you said, no one told me, I'm going to throw my people under the bus, so what if it happened, Russia didn't mean it, every one of those is going to play out within the next week. Just mark my words. If I could just quickly step back and touch on what the Foreign Minister Peskov said. Look, I think it's wonderful that we have an ambassador here so that we can use flowery language. I will not be so flowery as an intelligence collector. That man is a liar. And we know he is a liar. This is the man who shot down a Malaysian airliner and said it was, and didn't even recognize that they had their own surface-to-air missile launcher there blowing these 200 people out of the sky. This is the man who launched a chemical weapons attack in the middle of a NATO ally attempting to assassinate people and killed civilians. This is a man who had mercenaries attempt to attack a U.S. Special Forces ODA in Syria and get 250 Russian mercenaries slaughtered by 12 Special Forces soldiers, and they all deny everything. General John Nicholson, Commander U.S. Forces in Afghanistan in 2018, said, "We have evidence Russia is arming the Taliban." The ambassador referenced that a little earlier.
Well,
that came
Malcolm,
from Tajikistan.
Let me, for you, play, since you mentioned this, we get into then what's the response. And it's not that everyone wants to go to the highest escalated hot war, but Donald Trump's over on the other extreme, as you laid out. Here is a little more on the policy issues with Peskov. Take a listen.
Introducing so-called sanctions once in a while to different countries. It's a very favorite way of doing things in Washington, this habit of America, introducing sanctions. Well, of course, this is a joke. This is a joke, and I repeat, I think I've said enough on this issue.
Malcolm.
I mean, the man is the official face of an ex-KGB officer, okay, who deals strictly in these asymmetric warfare type operations. And I am certain that Russia did pay the Taliban. These reports have been coming out for the last 2 years from Afghanistan. People who are in the field have collected it. It's been at the joint intelligence collection level. It went up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These reports are real, and Donald Trump seems to be the only person in the room who claims that he wasn't briefed, despite the fact that there are flash traffic communication systems designed to get this level of intelligence into his hand within 10 minutes. So everybody here is dancing around the subject, but what we are seeing is a president of the United States who is so afraid of Vladimir Putin that he wouldn't even let this subject come up or admit that it was even discussed. And we're going to find out in the end that he is covering up something. You know, I always say this about Donald Trump. When you owe money to your bookie, you talk nice about him.
Well, there's a lot there. I will repeat, journalistically, in this story, we don't have the reporting yet on whether it's a cover-up or not. But Malcolm, Nance, you speak from evidence and precedent, which I appreciate. Ambassador McFaul giving us the foreign policy. Thanks to both of you. I feel more read in having listened to you tonight. And